everybody. I see a lot of people already saying hello in the chat. Hi, welcome. Good to have you here. I see Inge, Gabrielle, Karen, Wimkje, Karin, Beauty Incognito. I would love to know your name. From Indiana, USA. Welcome. Good to have you here. It is already lesson 4. It's unbelievable. It's going really fast. So today it's going to be all about water-soluble products and inks. And there is so much I can tell you about this. I know for sure that the 2 hours that are planned are not going to be enough to show you everything you can do with especially inks and alcohol inks. So I will show you the techniques that I like most or are the most interesting to show you. And then there are some videos showing some techniques that I will not be able to show during these 2 hours, and I will put the links in the playlist and in the Facebook group, and then they will also be in the next email you get before lesson 5. So I wrote some notes down to make sure that I cover everything because it's so much. It would be easy to forget something. So I'm just going to check my notes. And I just decided in this very minute that I'm going to change the order a little bit because that actually makes more sense. So I'm going to start today with the water-soluble products, which are not inks. So that would be things like water-soluble crayons and watercolor. And I see a lot of people tuning in today. Hi, everyone. So nice to see you all. Thank you for being here. So I want to tell you a little bit about, let me see. So I wrote down that I would explain first the difference between the water reactive and the permanent inks, but I'm not going to do that because I'm going to start with the crayons and the watercolor. So I think I will just turn the camera around and just start because there's so much I want to talk about that I don't want to waste any time. So here we go. And let's make sure you get a good view on my table. Let me see. I think that's pretty okay. Maybe it's a little bit more. Okay. It's not going exactly as I want, but this should be, I don't know. Sorry for that, but I think this is better. This looks way better. So here you see already my plates, and I have a couple here. I have actually 3 here, and that's for the second part when I start working with the inks, because that takes sometimes takes a bit of drying time, and I don't want to sit around waiting for the inks to dry. So then I will just work on several plates and go from one to the other. So there's time to dry and I can just move on to the next technique. As you can see, these 3 plates I have here, they are very yellow. And that's because of the pigments in the inks, especially in the alcohol inks, but also in the solvent inks, like the archival inks, for instance. The dye inks, they have especially the yellow pigments, as you can see, stain the plate. So that's all the yellow colors, but also the green colors that have yellow in them, and the lighter or the brighter oranges that have like a lot of yellow in them. They will stain your plate, and this is what they will look like, completely yellow. You will not be able to get it off no matter what you try, and but it does not affect your future prints, and it does also not harm your plate. So you are good to use the inks on the plate. The only thing, of course, is that when you put paint or especially ink on this plate now, your colors might look a little bit weird. So for instance, if I put a blue ink on here, the inks are usually quite translucent. If I put a blue ink on here, it looks green. If I put a pink ink on here, it looks orange. And so you might get a little bit of a wrong idea about what your print is going to look like when you pull it. So you might see me put ink on the plate and think that I'm working with greens and oranges, and then when I pick it up, it's actually blue and purple. I will try to keep in mind that I have to show you the colors before I put them on the plate, so you know what the actual colors on the plate are, and it's not going to look so weird when I pull the print. I also have my small plate out because some of the techniques are take a little bit more time to do. And then if I do it on a smaller plate, it takes less time, and I can have more time to show you also some other techniques. So that's why the plates are yellow. And this is not going to happen to your plate when you only use the water-soluble products like the water-soluble crayons and the watercolor and the watercolor pencils. But I decided to just go with the yellow plates because that's safer. It happened too many times to me that I, by accident, put ink on a good plate, and that's why I ended up with several yellow plates. So I'm just going to do everything on the yellow plates. But first, let me show you the product that I want to work with first. So let me see. I'm going to start with watercolor. And I have here, let me see, I have more, but these are the ones that I'm going to show today. So I also have some really expensive watercolors from, and I by accident, I put in the supply list that they are Rembrandt, but they are actually Van Gogh watercolors, but they are quite expensive, and I don't see any good reason to use those expensive watercolors on the plate, as the effect will be about the same. So I have some Art by Marlene watercolors here, but you have like these little tins also from Prima Marketing, for instance. Oh, something happened here. I think I took them on a trip and they fell out. But anyway, so this is a little tin with watercolors, and I have 2 different ones. I'm curious how this one looks. This one looks good. I'm just going to use this one. I also have some watercolor from the dollar store, which is a really cheap, only a couple of dollars, really cheap, and for the kind of things that I am going to use it for, this is just fine. So if you have, for instance, the Van Gogh watercolor, they are like really translucent, and they are they look like just water and pigments when you use them. And these cheaper watercolors have some kind of a bit of a chalky, I think, a binding product in them, which is a bit chalky. And so that's also the case with these. But you know, when you do it on just like normal paper and use it on your gel plate, then these are just perfectly fine. And then I also have here, and these are actually quite expensive, but these are so much used already that most of the sheets are almost empty already, or at least a great deal of the sheets already. But these are peerless watercolor sheets, and so these have a thin layer of watercolor on one side of the sheet, and you just take it off with a wet brush. And I am just going to show you how that goes. So if I put some water on my brush, I can just go over if here's still something on here, and then I can just, as you can see, use it as watercolor. So these are perfect when you want to bring watercolor on your travels, for instance. If you do urban sketching or something like that, then this is perfect. But most of them have been used quite a lot, so yeah, I sometimes also take them out when I do gel printing. But you definitely don't need those expensive watercolors, although if that's what you have on hand, then of course you can just use them if you don't want to go out and buy something especially for gel printing. So watercolors, they are very unpredictable, and they are so watery and so wet that they will not stay in the place where you put them on the plate. It is they will bead up. So if you put some water on the plate, for instance, as you can see, you get drops of water. So the fluid is like beading up. It's creating little beads of water, and you can't like spread the water. It will always go into little drops of water. Of course, that is also going to happen if you use watercolor. And therefore, it is quite difficult to work with, in the matter that if you want to use, for instance, stencils, or you can't use it with stamps or art printing plates, for instance, texture plates. You can use it with stencils, but in a very different way than you would normally use stencils on the gel plate. And I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to place a stencil on my plate, and I'm just going to push it down so it kind of sticks to the plate everywhere. So there's not going to be too much going under the stencil. And now I'm just going to apply random colors with a brush. I'm just going over the stencil, and as you can see, it's totally beading up the color. It's not like an open area is going to be completely filled with watercolor. It's more like going to the edges. It's kind of piling up in the edges of the open areas. And this way I'm just going to fill my entire plate. And you probably can see that also a little bit of watercolor is piling up on top of that stencil. And that's exactly where I want it to be in this case. I'm just going to do a variety of colors and make sure that I go over the entire stencil. And you do need quite a lot of water because you cannot apply dry watercolor to the plate. So if your brush is not wet enough, you will not be able to transfer the paint from your brush to your plate. So I think I have it quite covered now. On the other hand, you also don't want too much water, because then if you put the paper on top, it will just spread. Like you put the paper on top and you rub it. If there's too much water on top of the stencil, it will just spread underneath the paper, and then you will also lose the texture of the stencil. And this is one of those very unpredictable types of gel printing where you just have to go with whatever you get. And so I said at the beginning of this course, like probably in lesson 1 already, that you will see me pull not so perfect prints. Today is the day that that's most possible that is going to happen. Because of these techniques, you never know what's going to happen, and you just it's going to be a surprise always what you're going to pick up. And sometimes you're like, I actually quite like that, and sometimes you're like, this is absolutely rubbish. So let me see, and there we go. So this one turned out really well. I really like the watercolory effect, that you have some areas where there was just a little bit more water and it kind of spread out, and you get these like water drops, colored water drops in the open areas. This is something that you could never achieve with just a stencil and watercolor. This effect can only be you can only get it when you use a gel plate. And I think this one is quite a pretty one. I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. And what I can try, but this is usually not going to be very effective, but I can try and see if there is any watercolor that's left underneath the stencil still on the plate. And because it's so little and it was pressed underneath the stencil, it actually could have stayed in place. So I'm just going to see if I can lift this up. And Inge is asking if I use special watercolor paper, and in this case I'm not. I'm just using my regular. No, this did not work. There was not enough left on the plate. This is just normal card, like it is similar to copier paper, but it's a little bit heavier. I think this is probably 200 grams, and it's very smooth. So you would get a different effect if you would use watercolor paper. And that's actually one of the things that I talk about in your assignment sheet, that you should use all your products, but not only the products, but also the different types of paper. Because if you would use watercolor paper here, you might get some texture in your watercolor, or you might actually not get those splashes of color here because the watercolor paper takes up the watercolor better than in a different way than this paper does. So if you start trying these products and do some printing with watercolor, then just have a couple of different papers on hand and just try all of them to see how they work and which one you prefer. Because what I like is not necessarily what you like. And you might prefer a different type of print and a different type of paper. So that's watercolor. And let me see if there was another. So what you can also do is, oh yeah, that's what I wanted. What I wanted to say about watercolor, and that also goes for every other technique that I'm going to show today with water-soluble products is if you want to use this, for instance, as a background in your art journal, then you want to seal this, because if you go work on top with different media, wet media, I mean, you can go in there with pens and markers and that will be fine. But for instance, you want to add more color, and that can be watercolor, but that could also be stamping ink or even acrylic paint, for instance, and you would apply that with a brush to this background, then you would reactivate the watercolor because it's water reactive. So if you want to seal it because of the you want to make it permanent, what you can do is use a matte medium. And that is also when you work with crayons, or when you work with a water-soluble stamping inks, for instance. Anything that's water-soluble, if you want to seal it, then you cannot apply the matte medium or whatever medium you want to use for it with a brush, because if I would go over this with a wet brush, then it would reactivate. So also if I would go over it with a brush with a medium. So you have to make sure that the medium is not moving while you are applying it to your background. And there is no better way than using your gel plate. And you have to make sure that you have a really thin layer of the matte medium, the gel medium on your plate, because if you have a thick layer, then it will kind of squeeze out underneath the paper, and then of course it's moving, and then it can still reactivate your water-soluble product. So make sure you have a very thin layer. It's better to do 2 or 3 layers if you want to be sure than doing 1 thick layer. And I'm actually only going to do it on half of the paper, because then no, that doesn't make sense. I'm just going to place this on top and add that thin layer. And if my layer is thin enough, then it should not change how my print looks. So here we go. Now we have, oh, my plate is a little bit dirty, I see here. But that's okay. So now I have a little layer, a thin layer of the matte medium on top. And I'm just going to dry it real quick, so I can actually show you. And I'm going to do another thin layer, just to be sure. And that's why I dried it real quickly, because you can never pull wet medium from the plate with wet medium on your paper. It will just, the medium that's on the plate will just not stick to your paper if your paper is still wet. So if you want to have a good pull from your plate, that's also the case when you, for instance, want to build up layers, printing layers on top of each other. You will always get a better result when the paint on your paper is dry, when you try to pull up paint from the plate, if that makes sense. I'm just going to clean my clean the matte medium from the plate. So it's no longer there when I go there with my next product. And then I'm just going to dry this one again. I think it is dry enough. I hope it's dry enough. I'm just going to try. So if I go on there now with water, as you can see, it is not reactivating. So I sealed my paper with the matte medium. So that's a tip for if you want to work on top of a water reactive background. By the way, the black sheet I have here on my table, I've put that on my table because, especially with the alcohol inks that are fluid, they sometimes run over the edge of the plate through the paper, and then when they end up on my final, I can't clean it anymore. So I prefer to have this sheet underneath, and it's basically the same as a craft sheet, but this is I think it's called a baking sheet, and you can put it in your oven and you can cook on it. And it's heat resistant, it's non-sticky, and it works like a craft sheet, but it's way cheaper. So, and I don't know, I like that it's black and not brown. I don't know, it works better for me. So yeah, that's watercolor. I use watercolor mostly with stencils to create prints like the one I created before, because if you just work with watercolor straight on the plate, you can of course still get some fun results, but they are going to be just very random watercolory background. So what I can do is just add some color to the plate, and then stick my paper on top, and then I will get blobs, I don't know how to call it, but bits of color that look very watery. I'm just going to do it because they will kind of squeeze out when you put the paper down. And if you're looking for something like this, then of course that's fun. And then it can, of course, be a starting point for like background, or a starting point for an art journal page. And if you like to create something like this, of course, if you want to work on paper like this, then this might actually be quite a good way, because if you would try to do this with your brush on paper like this, that would not work because it kind of like soaks in immediately. And of course here it's also you will get a different result when you try it on watercolor paper or book paper, for instance. But that's fun to experiment with and explore and try out for yourself, because it's not only fun. Experimenting is not only fun, but it's also the best way to learn, by trial and error, I think you can call it. And by experiencing yourself how it works, it also is more likely to like click in your head, and you understand the process and why things are happening. Then it's always easier to understand a technique and how it's built up. So yeah, watercolor. I don't use it a lot, but sometimes with stencils it can be really fun. And you can also experiment with it and combine it with stamping inks, for instance. Okay, from watercolor, let me see, because I see Wimke asking, how do you clean your plate? Well, I just, what I did now was just spray some water on there and then take off the excess watercolor, and also the matte medium with a paper towel, because the watercolor is water reactive, so it comes off easily, and the matte medium was still wet, so it was easy to wipe it away with some water and a baby towel, paper towel. You could also use baby wipes or a wet cloth. And if you have pigments on there that don't come off with a baby wipe, for instance, like from Pen Pastel, for instance, they are pigments that do come off your plate, but not with a baby wipe, and you need a little bit of baby oil. So you just do some drops of, put some drops of baby oil on there, and then a paper towel or a baby wipe, and you can just clean your plate. Then after watercolor, I am going to talk about water-soluble crayons and watercolor pencils. And so there are so many brands and types out there, and I'm just going to talk you through a couple of them that I have, and which one I like and why, and things like that. So first, here I have my Dina Wakley scribble sticks, and I really like these. These are probably my favorites to use on the plate, together with the Lyra triple that I'm going to show after, because these release color very easily. They are quite hard, but still, if you put water on them, like with a brush, for instance, the color comes off very easily, and the colors are very rich. So they are very vibrant, very nice, rich colors. So these are really, really nice, especially if you want to use them to draw on the plate directly, because then you need crayons that release the paint, or the it's not paint, of course, but that release the color very easily, because you can't use dry crayons on the plate. If you try to color on the plate with a dry crayon, it's just not coming off. No matter which crayon you have, it's not going to release the color. So it needs to be wet. And these react like instantly on water. These take a little bit longer. They kind of need more the water to soak in more, or I'm not really sure what it is, but it takes a bit longer for the color to come off. And especially, so like with the brush, it's quite okay. But if you try doing that on the plate, then these take a little bit more effort than these. But of course, these are also a very good quality. These are Neocolor 2. And you have to make sure that if you want to use your Neocolors, that they are Neocolor 2. And it also says aquarelle. So these are from Carandash, which is a Swiss company. And the Neocolor 1 are oil crayons, oil pastels. So they are not water reactive and they can't be used on the plate. So make sure that you have the Neocolor 2. Then I have these, and these are from Lura Groove Triple. And this is a German brand, but these are very similar and can be compared with the Woodies. So I think in the US they are widely available, the Woodies, and they are quite similar to these. And these are, I think, originally made for kids. These are used a lot, at least as far as I know, here in the Netherlands and in Europe, in kindergarten, for instance. And these also, so together with the scribble sticks, these are also my favorites because these are the same. They are quite soft and they release color very easily. So they are just great to use on the gel plate. Then we have watercolor pencils, also in a variety of brands. So we have the Faber-Castell or Faber-Castell, I think you should call it in English, and these are also German. And then we have, here I have Bruinzeel, which is a Dutch brand. And what is this? Stabilo, also I think German, but I think these brands also are available in the US, in Australia probably, at least a couple of them. But it doesn't really matter because all of the brands will work. And you just have to find out for yourself which ones work, which ones you prefer. I mean, even if you have like the cheapest watercolor pencils from the kids department, they will work. So just try with whatever you have on hand. Don't go out and buy something new because it's probably not needed. And then another one that I have here is, this one belongs in here, by the way, is these Derwent Inktense. And the Derwent Inktense are a bit different because they are watercolors. They are, you use them with water, but once they dry, they are permanent. So if you use these, then you don't have to seal it because once the color has dried and the water is gone, then they are not going to be water reactive once they are on the paper. Unless you put them on the paper and then have not added any water yet, then of course you can add water and they will react. But once the water dried up, then they are permanent. But also work great on the plate. These might actually stain the plate a little bit more because they dry permanent, and then you might need some baby oil to clean that. I'm just going to show you how you can use these. And so you could use them the way I just used the watercolors. You can have a stencil on top, and you can take the color from the crayon and apply it to the stencil, and then you will have exactly the same effect as I just showed you with the watercolor. So if you do have these and you don't have watercolor, but you want to try that technique, then you can just do it like that. Use your brush to take away color from the stick and then just apply it on your stencil, and you will have the same effect. But of course you can also draw with the crayons on the plate. Now the plate or the crayon needs to be wet for the color being able to release from the crayon. So you can do two things. You can either spray your plate with water and then draw in there, or you can dip your stick into water and then apply it to the plate. So it depends on whether or not you want your whole plate to be wet or only in the areas where you are going to put the color. Now, if I would only just draw on the plate like this, it is not like it's a very special effect when you pick up this, like only the drawing of the color, and then maybe I could add, I need a little bit more water here. You can see it when the stick is not wet enough that it's not releasing color anymore. And you also have to make sure that it's not going to dry up before you are ready to pull the print. But for instance, I also want to add finer lines, then I can use my pencils, and then also I would need to dip them into the water, or I could have sprayed some water on the plate and then I could just draw right in there. So of course these thinner lines will dry a bit quicker than a puddle of color and water. So not all of it might pick up when I place the paper on top. I can also add, let's add a little bit more color, because otherwise it's going to be very boring. But I have some samples where I use these kinds of prints to show you that they might actually be more fun than you might think when you see me pull it. I'm just going to try if I can add some yellow here in the middle. No, that's too wet in the middle to add yellow there. But I can add some yellow here. Okay, I'm just going to pull this and then you will probably think, okay, what's the use? But that's fine. And here is the same as with the watercolor. If you use too much water, it will just squeeze underneath the paper and make like big blobs of color, and you will lose the circles. But so this is kind of what you get then. And you might wonder what to do with this, but I'm going to show you some samples right after this. So this is what I picked up, and then as you can see, there's also some pigments left on the plate, and it doesn't look much, but it could be more than you think. So I'm actually going to try and pick that up. And this is dry. So once you picked it up with your paper, all of the wet media kind of soaks into your paper, and so the pigments that are left behind on the plate, they are usually dry, so you can use paint to pick it up. And I'm just going to do what I usually do, and that's using a little bit of white paint. And I only need a tiny little bit because this is a tiny little plate. And I'm going to use a tiny little brayer and roll out the paint and see if there's anything left to pick up. And if I can pick this up, you will see that it looks totally different than the first. So this looks a little bit different than the first one. So I see Carola asking, why should I print this with the plate? I could draw on the paper directly, isn't it? Of course you could draw on the paper, but it will look different. It will never look like this. It is, I mean, there are also people who say, why would you use a plate if you can paint? But it's also about how this looks, the feel of a print. So if I would draw directly on the paper with a wet stick, for instance, you see that it's a different technique. It's like not like floating. It's not you won't have those little areas where there's more color, where the lines are going to be thicker or thinner or move more, or some areas that are dry and that is then just not printed. So if you look at these two together, then this looks way more like watercolory. So yeah, as I said, this is not something that I do a lot. I have done it quite a lot, but lately I'm not doing it a lot because, yeah, it is a specific type of prints, and you have to have a purpose for them. That you think, oh, this is these are fun backgrounds for what I want to do, for instance. And before I'm going to show you some more samples, I'm going to show you one other way to do it, and that's a way that I like the best. And then I'm not going to paint on my plate just with the crayons, but I'm also going to add some paint. And what I like to do is to not fill my plate completely with paint, but just some areas. I'm just going to add 2 colors. And as you can see, I also added a little bit of water because I need my paint to stay wet for a little bit longer than normally, because I want to draw in there with my crayons. And the paint also needs to be wet enough to pick up that the crayons. And also this will give a kind of a watery effect to my acrylic paints. So now I can just use my crayon and draw in the paint. And the crayon will kind of push the paint aside. So it's not even like really mixing with the paint. So you keep the bright colors of the crayons. Let me see another color. And I'm just trying on my paper. I don't know if you see it here, but I'm just trying on the paper if I feel like it's releasing enough color to do it on the plate. And then I can also again use my pencil and draw some lines in there using a pencil. Make sure that it's wet enough to actually release some color. And as you can see, my paint stays wet quite a while, so I do have some time to work on it. Well, I'm just going to go with this. I don't want to spend too much time on these techniques because they are very random and you probably will not use them as much as the other techniques. But at least you know how that you can use the products on the plate, and what you can expect. So you could never create something like this using a brush and kind of draw straight onto the paper. You will get a totally different effect, not this like painty, watercolory effect that you have now. So I have some samples here where I use this technique to create backgrounds. So this is a background that is also crayon marks in acrylic paint background and of first layer of acrylic paint. And here I did basically this technique, and then this is from leftover colors on the plate picked up with white paint. So here I didn't do anything on top of it yet, but here I have a little book, and a lot of these backgrounds are made with this technique. So here you can see that I used the crayons and the paint, and then later I worked on top with pencils, and I added some die cuts and some stenciling, and the same here. So this entire background was made this way, and I only added some white marker marks and some letters from an old book on this background. But the entire background was made with paint and water-soluble crayons. So you would not be able to create these kind of backgrounds straight onto the paper. So it's all about the feel and how they react. And these are all that kind of backgrounds where I worked with water-soluble products. And then here also, as you can see, it kind of blended. Colors were picked up in some places, they were not picked up. So all of these backgrounds were made that way. So if you like that kind of backgrounds, then this is something for you to try. Let me see if I can pick up a little bit more from that plate, and otherwise I'm just going to clean it. But as I said, you can also do the watercolor technique with the crayons if you want to. Now I need to clean this. And again, I'm just going to use some paint to pick it up. But yeah, you know, sometimes you just don't see the benefit of using the plate, or it's just not for you. I mean, there are so many techniques you can do on the plate. And definitely not all of them are going to be your favorites. I mean, I have a lot of techniques that I tried and worked with that are not my favorites. You will end up with a couple of favorites. Like after this, I will... oh, this is actually quite nice. Now I just printed on top of what was already there. This would be one of those backgrounds as I had here in this little book, and I can see myself totally working on this and creating something fun. But there are people, for instance, that will never print with acrylic paint. I know some people who never wanted to use a gel plate until they discovered that you can use your gel plate with stamping inks. And they only use stamping inks on the plate because they like the effect of stamping inks. They like that it's, I don't know, less messy or something, or they like the colors of the stamping inks. There can be all kinds of reasons why you prefer stamping inks instead of acrylic paint. I will never... stamping inks are never going to be my favorites because I think the colors are not bright enough. I like the texture of acrylic paint. I do love alcohol inks because they are so vibrant, and there are totally different things that you can do with alcohol inks, but stamping inks are not my favorites, although I can do absolutely lovely things with stamping inks, and I'm going to show you a couple, but they would never be my first go-to product on the plate. So I hope that's explained it, why you would use a plate with these products. So I'm going to show you, let me see. Yeah, I wanted to show you something I created with felt tip markers, and because I'm not going to show that right now, because I think it's not worth the time, as I can quite easily explain how to do it, but I think I even have a video somewhere showing it, so I can put a link in the playlist. But what you can do with felt tip markers is also create a very watercolory effect, because they also don't really spread on the plate, although they spread better than, for instance, watercolor. But what you could do is, for instance, cover your plate with a stamping ink, then remove excess ink from the open areas with some cleanup paper, and then color it in with felt tip markers. So I also have quite a lot of felt tip markers here from very cheap kids markers with a really thick tip, which are great to color in open areas in stencils, for instance, or in masks. And then we have the whole shebang of felt tip markers from Bruinzeel and Stabilo, and a lot of felt tip markers without any brand. Any marker will work. So you can, and they are compared to some of the stamping inks, very vibrant. The colors are very vibrant, so you can create very vibrant prints using felt tip markers. And if I would have more time, I would show you, but it takes quite a while to actually fill a stencil or a mask with felt tip markers, and I think that's too bad, because there are techniques that need a little bit more explaining than the felt tip markers that I would rather use my time for. So what I'm going to do before the break is to show you all the different inks, and then after the break I will show a couple of techniques with stamping inks, and then also a couple of techniques with the alcohol inks. And maybe it's good to warn you that it might take a little bit longer than the 2 hours that I planned. So, you know, it might get a little bit later. But let's talk about inks, stamping inks. And I'm going to start with showing you all the different inks that I have. And to tell you that I don't know a lot about stamping inks. That means that I don't really know how to use them for stamping. Which ink to use for what kind of stamping, what the ingredients of the inks are, if one is more permanent than the other, which one you should use if you want to color in any stamped images, stuff like that. I don't know about that. I just know how my inks react on the plate, and because I'm not a stamper. So if you need to know or want to know things about the inks regarding stamping or that kind of stuff, then don't ask me, because I just don't know. You just have to ask Google or somebody who is a stamper. But I can tell you a bit about how I use stamping inks on the plate. So for me, there are two types of ink. And that's not what it is. There are many types of ink, but for me, they are either water soluble or they are permanent. And then the permanent ones are the ones that are on that are solvent based or alcohol based, and then you have the water based inks that are water soluble. So water soluble, for to start with, for instance, is a distress ink. Tim Holtz distress inks. They are very wet, and if you use them on the plate, they act like watercolor, and they will bead up, and you will get a lot of little drops, but the ink will not spread on your plate. So these are really hard to use with stencils, or and you can also not use them with stamps or texture plates, because they simply will not go into that shape that you want them in, and they will just move on your plate. So the only things that you can do with distress inks on the plate are similar to what you would do with watercolor. So I don't use them a lot on the plate. Then you have distress oxide, and don't ask me what's in there, but they are a bit chalky. And that's probably the ingredient that makes them, that gives them that oxide, how do you call it, reaction when you add water to them. And that ingredient makes that they stay more spread on the plate. They are not as wet as the normal distress inks, and they don't bead up as much. They do bead up a little bit, but you can use them with masks and stencils, for instance. So these are quite fun to use on the plate. Then you also have pigment inks and chalk inks, like for instance, the Memento and the VersaFine Clair ink, pigment inks. And then you also have, these are a bit chalky, and these are, I don't know what it is, but they spread really nice on the plate. They are not as wet as the distress inks, and they give a really nice even layer of color. And then we have from Spectrum Noir the Harmony, and there's the water reactive dye, and there's the quick dry dye. So the water reactive dye is very similar to distress ink, and they also react like distress ink, but they are a little bit less wet on the plate. They are a little bit easier to spread on the plate than distress inks. And the quick dry dye is a permanent ink. And the funny thing is that although it says quick dry dye, they dry very slow on the plate. So if you use them on the plate, you have quite some working time. But then once it's dry on the paper, then they are permanent, and you can work with all kinds of other medium on top. And then I have my archival and my StazOn, which are the permanent inks that dry the fastest, and StazOn dries the fastest. Archival is the second. So if I do techniques where I want my ink to dry on the plate, then I usually use the StazOn, because as you might know by now, I don't like to sit around and watch paint dry, and that's the same for ink. So I I try to use the StazOn if I want the inks to dry before I pick them up. So if I want to do a technique where I pick up my inks with paint, then I use the StazOn. But on the other hand, the StazOn and the archival stay wet long enough, especially the archival, long enough to create some texture in them with a texture plate, for instance, and then pull the print before the ink dries on the plate. So you have some working time, a little bit more than when you would use acrylic paint. And I also have these little ones from Archival. And then I also have the Archival Distress inks, these. And although they are called distress inks, they are not like the distress inks, water soluble, and they don't act like distress inks. They are just called distress inks because these colors match the distress ink colors. But they are permanent archival inks. So they work great on the plate too. So after the break, I'm going to show you first a couple of techniques with these stamping inks. And then the second half, I'm going to show you some techniques with the alcohol inks. So I'm going just to put these aside to make some room. And then I'm going to get the taking a break sign out. And let me see, what time is it now? Okay, I will be back a quarter past. So that's in about a little bit less than, let's say 9-10 minutes about. So you can take a drink, get a drink, go to the bathroom, etc. And me too. And I also will arrange some things here to do the next techniques to show you. So I will see you in a bit. Bye. Okay, I'm just going to the chat. Let me see. So, is everybody back here? Then I can answer. I will answer a couple of questions I see pop up in the chat. So the first question I see that I think I want to answer is from Claudia, who says, what if the matte medium dried on the plate? Well, that would basically be the same as when acrylic paint dries on the plate, because a gel medium is basically acrylic paint without the pigments. So you would have to clean it the same way as you would clean acrylic paint from your plate, which you can do by adding a new layer of paint and then pull the print, or you can use a tape, like a clear tape, to pull it from the plate, or you can just use a baby wipe and some baby oil and then wash it with lukewarm water and a little bit of soft soap. So it's not going to be a problem if it dries on the plate. And then I see a question about the Neocolor too, but that's already answered. Could you use watercolors on fabric? I don't know. I suppose you could, but it would kind of soak in there probably the same way as in just normal paper. So I would say, why not try? I mean, if you have some scraps of fabric and you have some watercolors, just try and experiment, and you never know, you might be onto something and find a fun new technique. Or you could I have never done it, watercolors on fabric on the gel plate, but you could just put it in as Google, and you never know, maybe some videos will show up. Then there is a question about the difference. Stephanie asks, acrylic ink and alcohol ink, what is the difference? Well, acrylic ink is, you could say, a very, so it is acrylic, and when it dries, it's kind of a kind of a plastic. And it's very, when it's dry, it's very similar to acrylic paint. And alcohol ink is alcohol based, and alcohol inks are usually very translucent, where acrylic inks can be very opaque. And alcohol inks will reactivate when you use a new layer of alcohol ink on top, or if you use like cleaning alcohol on top, or anything that has alcohol in it, like alcohol markers or alcohol stamp pads, then you will reactivate the ink. And acrylic ink is a permanent ink always. So there's no product that will reactivate acrylic ink. So that's, I think the biggest difference. And Claudia says you can use Neocolor too on fabric. So I assume that Claudia has tried that. That's fun. That's good to know. So let's take this away and let's go to stamping inks. I'm going to start with the simplest way of using stamping inks, which is I am going to apply a layer of stamping ink on my plate and then use a stencil. And I'm not yet going to use my archival and STAZON inks, but I'm just going to mix and match all of the others, because although they are all different, and if you use them a lot, you might have your preference for a certain brand because of how they look on your plate, they can be used all together. And some, like for instance the Memento and Distress Oxides, might look a little bit more powdery, and the Harmony and the Versaclair might look more vibrant, but they all work together. And just to show you that they all will do the job, I'm just going to mix and match them, and you will see. So I like to apply my ink straight to the plate, because then I get the thickest layer of ink. I have people seen taking the ink from the ink pad with the brayer and then apply it to the plate. The benefit is that you will never by accident touch another color with your ink pad and contaminate it. But I just try to be careful and make sure that my ink pads don't touch the color that's next to it. And I mean, if it does, then I just live with it, because I don't really use my ink pads in any other way than this, and I'm not too stressed out when they get a little bit contaminated. But I really like if I have the most possible color on my plate, so that's why I do it this way. But you can do it, as I said, with your brayer. So now I have these next to each other, and because I try to stay away from the other color, there's some room in between, and I'm going to use my brayer to blend them, to make them touch each other, so you don't have these open areas. And when I work with inks, I really like to use these Tim Holtz Distress brayers. They feel the same, and they work the same as the soft rubber brayers from Speedball. But I don't know, I like that they are black when I work with inks, because the inks not only stain the plate, but they also stain your brayer. And here you can see, this is one that I cleaned, but it's colored because I did use it with inks. So I kind of like using the black brayers, because they always look clean, even if there's ink on them. But otherwise, they work exactly the same as the Speedball brayer. And I just like this tiny little one to use on my little plate. And I have to make sure that I have some paper to clean off my brayer. And instead of just normal scrap paper, I'm going to take a paper towel, because you really want to clean off your brayer and get the wet ink off there. Because in my next print, when I'm going to use my brayer again, like with acrylic paint, it's just going to dry on the brayer, a little layer of acrylic paint on the brayer. And when you use the next color, nothing will happen with the next color if there's any dried acrylic paint on the brayer. But the inks will reactivate. So if I have blue ink on my brayer and in my next print I want to use yellow, then my ink is going to be green. So I have to make sure that I clean my brayer in between, and it just goes off better, comes off better on a paper towel than it does on just normal scrap paper. So that's why I will just roll off my brayer on the scrap paper in between. So I'm just lightly going to blend these colors. Not too much, because then I will roll off too much of the ink. And the more ink I roll off, the less bright my colors will be. And you probably know by now that I really like bright colors. And that's also one of the reasons that I don't use stamping inks so much, because the colors are just not as bright and bold as most of the time, most of the inks than acrylic paint is. Although there are some inks that give a really nice bright effect. So now I'm just going to use some scrap paper and remove the excess ink from the open areas of my stencil. I'm just going to see if I removed all of it. Lift up the stencil, and now I will get a nice print that has the image of the stencil, but with a watercolory look. It has a totally different look than acrylic paint has. So as you can see, it looks as if there are little water drops in there, as if it moved a little bit. It's just, but on the other hand, with stamping inks, you get to see a lot of detail. Sometimes you see in stamping inks, you see way more detail even than in acrylic paint, because stamping inks are always going to be a very thin layer. So every little detail will show in there, where you sometimes have a little bit too much acrylic paint on your plate, and you lose details. And that's something that will not happen with the inks, because you will never have too much ink on your plate. So yeah, very different look than the acrylic paints. And as you can see there, although I removed almost all of the ink from the open areas, as you can see here, there's still quite some pigments left in the open areas, and the color in a light way is still showing in the open areas. So you can try and take a clean sheet of pickup paper and remove even more ink to get a wider background. But this is the simplest way of using stamping ink on the plate. But now I'm going to do the same. I'm also going to use about the same colors, so I don't have to clean my plate. So there's a pink one, and I had a bluish one in the middle. How about I take a memento, because I have not used that in the previous print, the memento ink. And then I need one, how about a distress oxide here on the side. So you might see a little bit of a difference here, that the one that I had on the side, which is the Versafine, that it is more smooth, like very smooth, even layer, and that these two are both Harmony, Spectrum Noir Harmony, that they are a little bit more wet, look a little bit more than like watercolor, and have like these little drops in there. So that's the kind of differences that you will find in the stamping inks, and that's why you might prefer one above the other. But as I said, they all work. And here I have the Distress Oxide on the side. And maybe you saw it when I rolled it out, that I got a lot of little drops here. And even now, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but I can see that this is a little bit wetter. I don't know if that's an English word. More wet than the inks on this side. But that's because of it being a distress ink. But it's not as wet as the normal distress ink, because that would not work with this technique. So I'm now just going to do the same as I did before. And I am going to remove the ink from the open areas. And as you could see with my previous print, I have enough time to work, and the ink is not going to dry for a long time, especially not underneath the stencil, because most of these inks are supposed to dry on a porous surface, and the plate obviously is not a porous surface. And then especially when the stencil is in between, then it's going to take ages for the ink to dry. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some sponges. This is like a cut and dry foam. You can buy it in like big sheets, and you can cut it to smaller pieces, and they are also being used in stamping and stuff like that. I'm going to use a sponge like this, and I'm going to fill the open areas of the stencil with another color. So on this side I had a magenta, originally a magenta kind of color, and I'm just going to add color in the open areas with a different stamping ink. And there was, oops, now I'm lifting up the stencil. Of course, you have to be careful that that doesn't happen. I think there was a bluish one in the middle, so let's add some green. And also the Memento is more like a chalky ink, and it looks a little bit as if it beats up when you apply it, but then it kind of sinks out and is not chalky, or doesn't look wet anymore. And I'm just going to add some blue on this side. So if you do this at home and you have more time, you can take some more time and be more precise and take even longer, get in even more detailed if you want to. But I just want to show how the how the technique works. Excuse me. Sorry. So I'm just going to lift this up now. And you can see that this gives a totally different look. I'm so sorry about that. So yeah, if you think about the right color combination, so here it worked really well, here in the middle it didn't work as well. Also, you can see that the Memento was picked up more by the stencil than, for instance, the Harmony, which again gives a very smooth, even layer, where the Memento gives a more watercolory effect. So these are the first two, one with color and one without color, using a stencil. Then the next one I want to show you. Let me see, I just have to check my notes. Oh yeah, the next one I'm going to show you is using texture plates or stamps on the plate, and I'm going to do kind of collage printing, and I'm actually going to use a bigger plate because I want to have some more ink to work with. And I think I'm going to make sure that it doesn't move the whole time. Secure it on my craft sheet. And I'm going to print on tags. I think that might be fun. And then the techniques that I'm showing now, so I just used the stencil and now I'm going to use art printing plates. They, of course, you can also combine those techniques. You can use stencils and art printing plates in the same print and play with that and experiment with that. I'm going to use this one, and I can also use a stamp. How about I might actually use this one. And in my previous print, I applied the inks in 3 even parts next to each other and blend them. But now I'm going to just put different colors all over the plate, and then create a mixture of textures. And I'm doing it very randomly. I'm not even thinking about colors, so we'll just have to see how this works out. But I'm sure something will come out of it. Oops. That was stuck to the plate when I wanted to lift it up. Some green here. And now I need a little bit of color there. What color? How about that one is not open yet. I'm going to do a bright pink. So a lot of different colors. This looks a bit dry. And all of the different stamping brands, stamping pads on the plate. I'm just looking for another bright pink, but I don't have one. So I'll just, I think that's the same as I used there, but I'm not sure. Let's just go for this one. And now I have to make sure that I kind of blend those colors, but I have to be careful not to overbrayer. So I remove too much of the ink, and also not to move all colors all over the plate, because then I will just end up with mud. With inks, of course, it works the same as with paint. You kind of have to think about which colors you blend, and not blend them too much and overbrayer, because you lose the vibrancy of the colors then. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply texture using stamps and texture plates. And this is the same as when you work with acrylic paint. So the texture plate is taking away ink from the plate and therefore creating the texture. So I'm just going to use these two next to each other and have two different textures, and then I'm going to use my my tags, and I'm going to pick up bits of ink, but I'm not just going to put my tag down completely. I'm just going to do some kind of collage printing. So I'm just going from one place to the other, picking up bits of color and different texture from different areas. And that can be very, very random to create some kind of collage effect. And a little bit here in the middle. So here you can see a lot of different colors, a lot of different textures that can build up some kind of background. And the fun part with the inks is that they are so translucent that if you have them overlap in certain areas, you will also see the color that's underneath and the texture that's underneath. And then even if you like soft colors, you can even pick up the leftover paint with the second tag. And there will still be quite some ink on the plate. And of course, you could then continue printing on this tag in the next round. So if you do another session like this one, for instance, and then you take this tag again to pick up the leftover ink, then this will also turn out to be a colorful background with a lot of different textures. So that's one way to do it with the texture plates. But there's another way of using the texture plates. And now I want to clean my plate because I'm going to work on the same plate. And as you can see, when I spray the plate, the water on top is like picking up the color straight away. So it's like turning into blue water here right away because of the water reactive ink that's still on the plate. This much is coming off, so you can imagine that if I would put some yellow ink on here, that it would be totally turn into mud with the colors that were still on the plate. But yeah, so this is as I said, the difference with the acrylic paint color wise that I prefer. I prefer the details of the ink, but I prefer the colors and the texture and the feel of acrylic paint. But as I said, very personal. So let's do another one where I kind of build up collage type of background on my plate. And yellow on this side. I have to be careful there when I blend the colors because I have a purple here, and as you know, yellow and purple don't go well together. And I want a bright green. How about this one? Down here. So I'm going to start with the lighter colors because the purple will be quite hard to roll off. So I'm going to do that. Going to have that for the last. And now I'm going to do the purple here. Now, instead of just picking up color from the plate, I can also pick up some color and then move it somewhere else. So, for instance, if I push my texture plate in here, I'm picking up color, but the color is now on my art printing plate. So if I put my art printing plate down in another area, I'm moving the red from down here up here into the yellow. And now if I would go into the purple here and put it down here, then I'm transferring the purple from up here to down here. I could even apply a color to my art printing plate, a color that's not on the plate, for instance, and stamp in there to add even more colors. And then, of course, you also have to clean your tools in between, like your stencils and your art printing plates, because they the inks also don't dry on there. So that would give you the same problem, that you need to clean it, because otherwise you will contaminate your ink pads when you add another color on top of them. So I'm just going to put some more color here and one more, like, I think I used this already, but that's fine. And I can also overlap areas. And my hands look horrible now, but that's okay. So I can just print this and like straight away the entire one, or I could do something similar to this and make more of a collage tag, but this one I'm just going to pull as it is, because I think that shows better the fact that I added colors in areas, different colors in there. So here you go. This looks pretty good, especially that side. I really like that half. Big chance that I will cut this off and use this for something. And also these colors now are a little bit brighter, because I just pulled them in one go, and almost all of the color came off. So that's using stamping inks with stamping plates. And officially we have only 10 minutes left, but of course I can never ever show you all of the alcohol ink techniques, or I can't show you all of them anyway, but the ones that I want to show you in 10 minutes. So it's going to be a little later again today, I'm afraid. Because I really want to show you one more technique also with these inks. So, like last week, I hope you have some time left and you can stay a little longer. And if not, then at least there will be the recording and you can watch the rest in the recording. But I hope a couple of you will stay a little bit longer with me. So the techniques, there is a thing that I want to show you with stamping inks and leaves, and I actually want to use my archival inks for that because I don't know, if I use my stamping inks, then my archivals are my favorites, and they have really nice and bright colors, and they are really great for this technique, although I could also have used them for the other techniques, but these dry a little bit quicker. But I want to use some leaves, and in one of the previous lessons I already put a link in the description on how to preserve leaves with the glycerin technique. So these leaves are preserved with that technique. And I'm going to use them now to stamp on the plate. That looks a little bit dry, so I'm going to take this one just because this one is so dry. And this is similar to archival ink, as this is also a permanent dye ink, but it stays wet a little bit longer, or a lot longer. But to show you this specific technique, it will also work. Okay, so here we go. And again, I have to use my brayer to blend them. Like this. And now I'm going to place some leaves on top of the ink. Yeah. And I'm going to put them with the veins down because I really want the texture to show up in the print. I need a smaller one here. Okay, now I want to pick up the excess paint from the plate, the paint that's in between the leaves. But there are two ways to do that. One is using some cleanup paper that has already acrylic paint on it. Like acrylic paint is kind of like a plastic layer on your paper, and it is not picking up as much paint or ink as a clean paper would. So I want to show you the difference. So half of it I'm going to use, half of the plate I'm going to use this pickup paper. And I have so much on my desk that I have hardly room. And I'm also going to use a sheet of clean pickup paper, like just normal copier paper. And this is going to soak up way more of the ink. So if everything goes as planned, then you will definitely see the difference between these two when I pick up the ink. Okay. I'm just going to put it down one more time, because with this paper I really want to pick up all of that excess ink that's in between the leaves. And this is the one with the acrylic ink or acrylic paint on the back. And now I'm carefully removing those leaves, trying to. I should have used tweezers. Okay, there we go. And now I'm going to place a sheet of paper on top. That's what I thought. And you can also do this with feathers, for instance. They also create this very detailed texture when you use stamping inks. Okay, so here you can see the difference. This half was done with the clean paper, and this half was done with the cleaner paper that had already acrylic paint on it. And as you can see here, the ink was not picked up very well, so a lot of ink stayed in between the leaves. And here I could have been even more precise, or I could have put the paper down one more time and really remove even more ink. But you can see that here all of the ink was removed from in between the leaves. And you can also see that there are a lot of details in the leaves, and you can see all of the veins. Now, this is only the first print that I made with these leaves. And as you can see, there's quite some ink on the back of the leaves, and it will take a little while before that dries. So if I would do one more print using the leaves, then the color on the leaves would transfer to my plate. So if I would now use, for instance, greens and yellows, and I would put these leaves on top, then the leaves would actually get a different color than the color around. So sometimes you would prefer to actually keep this color in between the leaves, because the leaves will have a different color. So then you would have blue leaves in a yellow greenish background, for instance. And so that's why I wanted to show you both, because sometimes you just want those colorful leaves in a white background, and sometimes you want a different color leaf in a colorful background. And to show you the difference, I have some samples here. Let me see. So here is one. This one, I used the clean paper, the white paper, and it picked up all of the ink from the plate. As you can see, this is the background is very clean, and it looks as if the leaves were stamped onto the white paper, which is not true. It was picked up from the plate. So the white paper will absorb all of the ink. On the other hand, I have one here where I used my acrylic paint paper, and the ink in between the leaves stayed behind. Now here's not the best sample because of the colors being very similar, but let me see if I can find one that has a little bit. Here you can see very well that the leaves have different colors than the colors that are around the leaves. So these leaves had been used in a previous print with different colors than the colors that I had on the plate. And then, yeah, you get this effect, kind of a frosty feel, a kind of a wintry feel, using your, and here's one too, using the leaves with the color that's already there on the plate. So I really wanted to show you that, but now it's already 9, at least my time 9, and I want to go to alcohol inks. So I just have to make some room, and I'm just going to put these in here, and I have to get these out of the way because otherwise I will just not have enough room. So I have to clear my table. But that will only take a minute. And I hope you're not bored and tired with me already. And willing to watch a little bit longer. Inge says, does tissue paper remove more than normal copier paper? No, as you could see, the normal copier paper removed all of the ink. There was just no more ink to be removed left on the plate. It was completely gone. So in the sample I showed you. So no, and besides that, the tissue paper, the ink would soak through and it would be messy, and the ink would be on both sides of the tissue paper. So there's no real benefit of using tissue paper. Okay, alcohol inks. One of my favorite things to use on the plate are alcohol inks, and I was never really a big fan of alcohol inks before I used them on the gel plate, because all that I saw that was done with alcohol inks was that they that the videos where people kind of dripped alcohol ink on Yupo paper and then add more drips and create some kind of abstract artwork with them. And then on the Yupo paper, I don't know, the gloss that was on there, I'm not a big fan of Yupo paper. So it just wasn't my kind of product. So I did have alcohol inks and I used them on tin foil, for instance, but not so much as what they were meant for. And then I found out that I discovered that I could use them on the gel plate, and then a whole new world opened up, because if you use alcohol inks on the gel plate, you can print on any paper you like. So you can use, you can print on tissue paper, on book paper, on copier paper. You could even use print alcohol inks on fabric, because you always need that layer of paint to pick up the ink. And the paint will print on anything. So yeah, then I thought about, I played with the alcohol inks, and I discovered that I could use them with stencils and masks and all kinds of other tools. And I really like the vibrant colors of the inks. So yeah, I use them quite a lot on the plate. I am wearing gloves when I use the alcohol inks, because I should have wear my gloves with the other inks, because there are some dye inks with those too, and they will hardly come off my fingers. But the alcohol inks are really, they stain your fingers so bad, and I think it's not really good, healthy for your skin if you get the alcohol inks on your skin a lot. So I'm not going to work like a long time with a lot of alcohol ink, and I'm also not using a heat gun with them. So it's I just use them in a well ventilated room, and I will open my window and my door, and I will just work with them like this. But if you use a lot of alcohol inks, and if you use a heat gun, for instance, to dry your papers or your inks on the paper, or to move the inks around, then you should also wear a mask, because of the damp, the smell that comes from the alcohol inks is not very healthy. So if you want to do that, then you have to Google what kind of mask you need. But I always just use them like this, and I don't heat them. And as I said, open window, well ventilated room. Alcohol inks are very unpredictable because they reactivate each other. They push each other aside. They run. They dry. Not very like you, if you have a little bit more on the plate in some areas, then it takes forever to dry, and sometimes they dry like really fast, like instantly. If you have a very thin layer and it's really warm, they dry like instantly. So it's very unpredictable, but the feel and the texture of the inks in your print, I like that so much that yeah, I just go with the flow. So the first thing that I absolutely want to show you with alcohol inks, and let me make sure that I do this in the right. So I wear gloves, well ventilated. And yeah, I'm going to need 2 plates because of the drying time. I'm going to work on 2 plates. And I see that most of you are still here, which makes me happy. I also saw, I don't know, I don't think I answered that, but somebody asked about the tag books and how I bind them. So I have a video showing how to create those tag books, and I will add a link to that video to the playlist. I'm not sure if I already mentioned that, or that I just did it in my head because I wanted to mention it. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is using alcohol ink with a stencil. And let me see which one am I going to use. This one. No, I'm going to use this one. And I thought for a moment that there was already alcohol ink on this stencil, but it's not. It's acrylic paint, which is a good thing because I also have another one here. This one, for instance. And this is very glossy, you can see, which means that there is alcohol ink on this one. And if I would use this one with different colors, then these colors would reactivate, and I would have to be very careful which colors I would choose, because this would easily turn into mud. So if you want to clean your tools that you use with alcohol ink, you can use either cleaning alcohol like this. I think in the US it's called rubbing alcohol. And so I bought this online. This is from a Dutch store, but I bought it online because in the US it's very easy to get this, and it's also very cheap. In the Netherlands, when you go to a drugstore, for instance, you can only buy like these little bottles of alcohol, cleaning alcohol, and they are quite expensive. But if you look online, you can find these like bigger bottles, and although they are not like really cheap, they are a lot cheaper than in in a drugstore, and they go a long way. So you can use this to clean your tools, like your stencils, for instance, because it will just reactivate the alcohol ink, and you can just wipe it off then. So I'm just using a paper towel, and then I can just rub it off, as you can see. So you could also do this on a sheet of paper and then actually create this image of this stencil. And if you don't have alcohol, but you happen to have a blending solution, like the Ranger blending solution, then you can use that too. But I have to say, let me see where it is. I have it here. So I bought one bottle once, but this is basically exactly the same as this. It has the same ingredients. And this is so much more expensive because it says a Tim Holtz Ranger alcohol blending solution. But you can just as well use this. Much better for your wallet. Anyway, alcohol ink. It runs and floats and goes its own way, and you just have to go with that. So I'm just going to apply some color. Oh, this looks almost empty. And you can be very precise about, or quite precise about where you want which color, or you can just mix it completely. Use different colors together, but then again, be a bit careful about the colors you use together. So I have my alcohol inks in these tins where I can easily access them and see all the different colors. And I have my warm colors and my cool colors each in one tin. My blues and my greens. Let me see. I'm just going to go with this first. And now I'm going to roll out, kind of roll out the ink. So I'm basically not really rolling. I'm just kind of moving the ink around, because once I start like really rolling, I just will roll off that ink from the plate, because it will then quite fast start to dry and stick to my brayer. And I will just roll it off my plate. So it's more like moving it around and make sure that it blends everywhere than actually rolling it, braying it. Now I'm going to place my stencil on top. And I can't pull a print right now, because half of the ink has already dried. And as you know, you cannot pull dried product from the plate. So with alcohol ink, because parts of your plate will always like dry instantly, you can never pull a direct print. You always need a layer of paint to pull the alcohol ink. So what I could do now is try and lift up my stencil and see if the stencil picks up some of that alcohol ink, and if the rest is already dry, then you will probably see that that print, that design of the stencil. But it's way more fun to now add more colors. And the fun thing about alcohol inks is if you apply a new color in a color that's already there, it will kind of push the color, the dried color that's already there, aside. And you get like thicker lines around the edges of the design. But it's not like if I put like this blue in here, for instance, that it is like mixing with the color that's already there, but it's more like pushing it aside. So sometimes I just use my finger, I'm wearing gloves anyway, to spread the ink a little bit. And this new ink will go underneath the stencil partially, but not like completely. And so what you will get is when you lift up the stencil, that you have this new color in the already existing color that was already there. And I'm totally making a mess here right now, but that's okay. I just want to show you how it's done. Because obviously when I just put it in there like this, it's going to push the existing ink around. But once I start moving it with my finger, then I am, of course, blending it with the color that's already there. So that gives a totally different effect. And then once I'm done, I have to wait for the ink to dry. Because if I would lift up the stencil right now with all this wet ink, what would happen is it would just float. Because it's now, it's kind of a border here, that stencil. And once I pick it up, it will just float and you will totally lose that design. So you will only get the design of the stencil when the ink is completely dry. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to leave this to dry. And I hope we get to see that today, because that's also one reason why I am moving it around with my finger, because then I have thinner layers and it dries quicker. The colors will be nicer if you don't do that with your fingers, but then you will have, the piles of ink will be bigger and it will take much longer to dry. So that's, sometimes you have to wait like half a day. It really happens if I have a lot of ink on there. Sometimes I have to wait for a couple of hours before it's actually dry. I'm going to take this one and have a quick look at the chat, because I see some questions. Marlene says if you could use a hand sanitizer to clean your tools, because there's alcohol in it. I don't know if there's enough alcohol in it to reactivate the alcohol ink, but you can definitely try. And Anna is asking about the brand, and of course, yes, I didn't even say what brand I'm using. So the alcohol inks that I have here are the Tim Holtz Ranger alcohol inks. I really like them, but you also have a brand, I think it's called Marabu. And the colors also look really nice, but I have all these alcohol inks, so I didn't really see a reason to buy yet another brand, as they are not really cheap. But I also have, for instance, these. They are refillers for Copic markers, and Copic markers, of course, are also alcohol ink markers. And that is, so the inks in these bottles are the same inks that are also in the markers, in the alcohol pens. And these can also you can just take off the lid and then put them on the plate like that. Just the same as the Ranger ones. And there are more brands. There are a couple of different brands of alcohol ink out there. But I would assume that they all kind of work the same. So while this one is drying, I'm going to show another one. And that's the one with the little glasses and bottles. And I have to get them. So here I have my little glasses and bottle caps. As you can see, they've been used already. And I'm just going to put some alcohol ink on there, some color, to get some color, some base color. I'm going for some light colors like pink and an orange. Oh, I have also some green already here, right? How about what's this, salmon? Not sure how this is going to blend with the green, but we'll see. Rolling this out. So I have a thin base of color, and now I'm going to place some of these on top. And as you can see, there's still quite a lot of alcohol ink from previous prints on here, and I'm not cleaning my tools a lot, and so this will reactivate when I put that on the plate. And I kind of like it. I kind of like the surprise of how that turns out, and I just go with it, although it could also turn out really messy and really messy and very muddy. It might turn out like that you get a lot of mud, but I'll just go with it. And now I'm just going to use my little bottles and drip around these glasses and lids. And I just let, I don't know if you can see it, but a little bit higher, not like at the bottom of the glass, but a little bit higher. I let some of the ink drip down, and I don't really want it to go all over the plate. Here I actually used a little bit too much. I basically just want it to create a ring around the glass. So I want the color to touch all around, but not to completely fill the plate. So I'm just going to do that with a couple of different colors and see how that turns out. And one more color. Let's do, oh, this is a nice one, turquoise. Now I'm sure you can imagine that this takes quite a while to dry. It's like there's quite a thick line of ink around the around the little glasses and the lids, and not only around but also underneath. And if it's underneath something, then it takes even longer to dry than normally. So this will take quite a while. And what I want is I really want those rings to show. So as soon as I would pick up one of these right now, then I would totally lose the sharp outline of the ring. So I have to leave this to dry for quite a while. And probably that will not be ready today. It will not be dry today, but I can definitely make a little video when I pick it up tomorrow morning, for me tomorrow morning. And also put that in the playlist so you can see the result. I will finish it because there are even more steps than just this. And I'm just going to try and lift this up now. I'm just going to use my hair dryer, as I did before, on the cold setting, because I don't want heat on my gel plate, but I also don't want heat on the alcohol ink. So I'm going to put it on the cold setting, and just to make sure that it's completely dry. Now, when I lift up the stencil, there might be still a little bit of wet ink underneath. And then, as I said before, then it will start floating and you will lose the sharp and crisp lines. That could be totally what you are looking for. So sometimes you actually want to pick up your stencil just before it's completely dry, because you want a more organic look, because you want a more distressed look. But if you want those sharp lines, then you really need to make sure that the alcohol ink is dry completely. And I usually have this on hand, that if I pick it up and it's still a little bit wet, then I can quickly dry it and keep it from running. But I'm just going to pick it up now and see. And this is quite dry, because, and I know because it's not starting to run. Everything stays in place, and you can quite well see the darker outlines. You can really see the design of the stencil. It is still a bit like not completely dry. I feel like where the stencil was. So before I'm going to pull the print, I want to make sure that it's completely dry, because I'm going to put paint on top to pull the print. And of course, if the ink is not dry, I will mix the paint with the ink and you will get mud after all. That's also the case if you decide to pull up your stencil early because you want a little bit of floating. Then still you need to wait afterwards until the ink is completely dry before you add the paint. Always make sure all layers are dry before you add a new layer of paint. So I'm okay. I'm just going to take my chance and see how this will turn out. And I think it would be fun to actually show you that this can also be picked up with tissue paper instead of just normal paper, because as I said, that's the benefit of using alcohol ink on the gel plate, that you can print on any paper you like. So that's what I want to show you. Where's my brayer? Here. Oh, and now I'm making a mistake, but I'm in time to correct that. You don't want to put paint on the plate like this and then put your brayer on top and start brayering, because then the clean brayer is going to touch the ink and the ink will stick to the brayer and you will totally lift it up from the plate. So you have to make sure that the paint is already all around your brayer, that your brayer is wet everywhere before you start brayering on the alcohol ink. So what I usually do is I apply some paint on scrap paper, then roll it out with my brayer so I have some paint all around my brayer before I put it on my plate. And now I can just start rolling out that paint without the possibility of the paint sticking or the ink sticking to my brayer, because that of course you don't want. You don't want to lift up that ink with your brayer, but you want to lift it up with your paper. And as always, this layer needs to be really, really thin, because it works the same as when you use acrylic paint. Your paper can only pick up a certain amount of paint, and if you have a lot of paint, then it will only pick up the top layer of paint and not the dried product underneath. And that goes for alcohol ink, but that also goes for acrylic paint. Okay, now if this would not be a class, I would probably leave this to dry completely. I would leave it to for the paint to dry underneath the paper and then pull the print, because with alcohol it's even a little bit trickier to pull up the ink, and the chances are a little bit bigger that some of the ink stays behind. But I'm just going to go for it and hope that all of the ink comes off the plate. And I think it's not even that. It's going to be quite okay. There was a wrinkle in the paper. And some more little wrinkles. And maybe if I would have left the paper to dry or the paint to dry, then the wrinkles might have been pulled up too, but that's okay. But isn't that pretty? I mean, look at the colors and look at the organic feel and the, I don't know how to explain it in English, but the randomness, like you can't plan this. You cannot have this in your head that like, this is how I want it to look. It's very unpredictable, and you just have to be kind of lucky when you pull up your print and it looks like this. And it's, I mean, it's on tissue paper. It's very light and very thin. It's absolutely perfect for collage. And yeah, it is so different than if I would have used acrylic paint, because the blending, the way the inks blend, and areas where there are no inks, or where they push aside the other colors. This is something that you could never create with acrylic paint. So that's why I like alcohol ink so much. Okay, I'm real quick going to see if this is dry enough, but probably not. And I can see if this is dry enough. So if this is completely dry, the little glasses and the lids will basically be stuck to the plate, like yeah, as if they are glued to the plate. They won't move if I try really carefully. And if it's like still wet, then it moves very easily because it's really slick underneath. And these move very easily, so I can't pull them up right now, which means that you are going to get an extra video. I'm also going to upload or put the link to the tag book in the playlist. I also have a video about using cling film. You know what? I'm just going to put the camera around so I can actually talk to you. Let me see. Okay, there we go. That's I'm a little high. Okay. Okay, but that's okay. I'm just going back a little bit. So, yeah, I also have a really fun technique with alcohol ink is using cling film and create a very frosty feel that you might have seen in my reels. I have showed the techniques a couple of times in my reels, and of course they are like fast forward, and in like 30 seconds you have to show an entire technique. But of course I have the normal speed videos, and I will share with you some videos that you might have seen on my reels, but then in normal speed and with a little bit more explanation. So it's showing better how to do the technique, and with more details. And then I could have showed you prints with alcohol inks and reinforcement rings, or alcohol ink and Legos, or alcohol ink and foam stamps, or how to use alcohol ink and acrylic paint in one print, and how acrylic paint reacts to the alcohol ink. So I know for sure that I have a couple of videos, normal speed videos about that too. And tomorrow I will sit down and get some of those videos, because up front I had no idea which techniques I would be able to show and which I don't. So I will just add some links to the playlist tomorrow with some other alcohol ink techniques, and then I think you have quite a lot to explore and experiment with. And then of course you have your assignment. There is a little how is it called, a template. There's a little template like the one of last week, or the one that you got for lesson 1. Get to know your paints and get to know your colors. There's also now one, get to know your products, and then you can try all the different products that I talked about today with your different types of paper, and for your reference book. Or you can do it on tags also, and then have them all together on a bookbinding ring or something like that, to have a little reference of how the different products work. Coming Monday is the next Q&A. So if there are any questions that you want me to answer, you can put them already in the Facebook group, or you can email them to me, or you can wait for the Q&A and then put them in the chat, and I will try to answer as many questions as possible. And next week, lesson 5 is all about using pen pastel and alcohol markers and image transfers. And I know some of you have been waiting for the image transfers, so that's going to be a fun lesson too. That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you will be back next week. See you then. Bye.